Social psychology is the scientific study of the average everyday person. Fritz Heider in 1958 proposed his idea of naive psychology. He argued that all of us engage in the casual study of the everyday average person, right? That we all observe people and attempt to understand why they behave the way that they do, right? That many of us have some types of theories and beliefs that guide our attribution process, our attempts to explain other people's behaviors, right? The argument was when we observe people in our lives, our friends, our coworkers, even strangers, we don't see their actions as purely random. We have some understanding of what motivates people. But where do these ideas come from? The question is, can we trust these casual kind of layperson theories and ideas as to what motivates the average person's behaviors? So we'll kind of compare and contrast the methods that social psychology uses through the scientific method to other types of theories and attempts to explain human behavior. For example, many of us rely on generally held cultural beliefs or folk wisdoms to understand human behavior. These are beliefs that are popular in a culture and are often accepted without question, at face value. This can be problematic, as many of these folk wisdoms have little to no scientific proof, and in some cases, folk wisdoms can provide contradictory views of human nature. So these can be a poor method of discovering truth, but may be a starting point for questions. So take these folk wisdoms. Birds of a feather flock together and opposites attract. Both are popular sayings, but they can't both be right? They contradict each other. So which is it? Which provides a better or more accurate understanding of relationships? Social psych researchers use the scientific method and systematic data collection to provide an answer. They'll pit these two against one another to determine which has more supporting data. The research suggests that in the vast majority of relationships, birds of a feather flock together is the rule. Right? People seek out similar others in terms of demographics, appearance, beliefs, values, interests. We tend to surround ourselves with similar and like-minded others. The results of research in social psychology support the birds of a feather flock together explanation time and time again. One such study is McKinnon and colleagues' 2011 study. In this particular study, we have a room in which people are already seated in the room. And these people vary in terms of demographics and physical appearance. The dependent variable that the researchers were interested in is actually pretty simple. We have a target participant who enters the room, and the question is, where does this person sit? If they walk into this room in which people are already seated, and there are a number of open seats next to various people already seated in the room. And so the question is, well, our target participant, who do they choose to sit next to? And what these researchers found was that the target participant was significantly more likely to sit next to someone who was similar to them in terms of appearance. And this was true, pretty trivial, superficial appearances, things like hair color or whether or not the person was wearing glasses. So what these researchers found was that if the target participant was wearing glasses, they were more likely to select to sit next to someone who is also wearing glasses. And I actually see this time and again in the classroom. So I'll notice that students who are wearing glasses tend to sit next to each other in the class. So we can see that relying on folk wisdoms can be problematic if the systematic research doesn't support those folk wisdoms. Now we'll talk more about interpersonal attraction and friendship and relationship formation later in the semester. There are actually times in which the research suggests that opposites attract may explain relationship formation, but it seems to be the case that when we see opposites attract, these are very specific and select types of relationships. That birds of a feather flock together seems to apply very broadly to most types of relationships, and that we only see opposites attract when people are seeking out novelty, which is typically when they are motivated to form what they intend to be a short-term relationship. So a fling, right? If someone is seeking out a short-term romantic partner, they may specifically seek out someone who is highly dissimilar to them for the purposes of excitement and novelty. Right, so and keep in mind that this is on average what we see in most types of relationships. Of course, you may know some people who have formed stable long-term relationships, and those two people seem to be highly dissimilar. It's also important to keep in mind that your perception of two people may be very different than the perception that those two people have within their relationship. So you may see them as highly dissimilar. If researchers were to question those two individuals in the relationship, they may report that they are much more similar than you perceive them to be. So it can be a little tricky. So what about other sources of knowledge and information that we may have that guide our impressions of other people and our attribution process, how we attempt to explain other people's behavior? Another important source of information is personal experience. And this is often a point of contention because many argue, why do we need social psychology research? People think I have a lifetime of firsthand experience and evidence as to what drives people. Right? What can a researcher tell me that I don't already know based on personal experience? And particularly when research results contradict my personal experiences, how can a researcher tell me that my experiences are wrong? So our argument is not that personal experiences are wrong, but rather that each individual's experiences are highly subjective, and in some cases, personal experiences can be limited and potentially biased. And we'll talk about some of the reasons as to why personal experiences can be limited and biased. One big reason is birds of a feather flock together. The wealth of information that you have regarding human behavior based on your own personal experience is based in large part on people like you. That's who you have to observe. Right? Our firsthand observations are limited to the people that we surround ourselves with, which are likely to be a much more homogeneous group than the population as a whole. If we're surrounding ourselves with people who are like us, then all of this wealth of information that we have regarding human nature is limited in terms of all this information is based on people who are similar to me, right? I don't have a great deal of diversity of information regarding human nature. What's particularly problematic is that once a belief about human nature is formed, it can influence our experiences on multiple levels. when we gather information through personal experience, we're not always kind of passive observers. Often we are active participants in the social interaction. The world that we see may be more of a product of who we are than kind of objective reality. This is often why visual illusions are so fascinating when we talk about these in groups. So for instance, two different people may see two different things in this image here. So think about what you see. See if you can see both. So do you see a young woman turned away, or do you see an elderly woman? So different people may see different things for a number of reasons, influenced by their current motivations, their personality, their dispositions, recent experiences. This is a visual illusion that I particularly like because there is research to suggest that there is a predictable difference in terms of what people see. So research suggests that if you show this image to children, that children report that they see dolphins. So I won't ask you what you see, but the research suggests that adults see something very different. And so it kind of highlights how our experiences can influence how we see the world around us. So when we rely on personal experience as a guide to understanding human nature, we're filtering these observations through this subjective lens. What we see in others, it may not be objective reality. And what's more is that we are these active participants in social interaction. So we're not these kind of stand apart, objective, passive observers of other people's behaviors. Very often we take a part in that social interaction, and we may fail to realize the degree to which our actions influence our interaction partner. So this is a study of social mimicry. So we'll talk a little bit more in the next chapter about what is a research confederate. You see here to the right that we have confederate rubs face and confederate shakes foot. So in social psych research, a research confederate is someone who is posing as a naive participant when interacting with other real participants. But in fact, the research confederate is in cahoots with the researcher. Right? They're like an actor. They are acting based on a script. So the research team has instructed them, pretend like you're a participant, but act in these scripted ways. So here, our research confederate pretending to be another student participant is interacting with our real participant in a get-to-know-you conversation. And so the research confederate, depending upon the condition, here are kind of aqua versus dark blue. In this aqua condition, the research confederate is instructed to repeatedly rub their face during the social interaction. In our dark blue condition here, our confederate is instructed to repeatedly shake their foot during the social interaction. And then the dependent variable of interest is how does our real participant respond? And what the researchers found was that in our aqua condition in which the confederate rubs their face, the research participant, the real participant, was significantly more likely to mimic that behavior and rub their face as well. In the condition in which our research confederate shook their foot, the real participant was significantly more likely to mimic that and shake their foot as well. So social mimicry can be very powerful. And what makes it even more impactful is that very often we're unaware that this is happening. Right? It's not as though our participants here are thinking, oh, I should mimic this other person's behavior and start to rub my face or shake my foot, right? Very often this happens on an unconscious or subconscious level. When we look at real social interactions, we can see mimicry. Very often, the actor, the individual, may display certain nonverbal, subtle indications of their intentions and their perceptions of their interaction partner. So, for instance, if I like and I trust someone that I'm interacting with, I may lean forward, so lean towards the other individual and make more eye contact. I may nod as they are speaking, versus if I lean away from someone that I'm interacting with. If I do not make eye contact with that individual, if I fidget, that can communicate a lack of interpersonal trust and liking and a desire to end the conversation or end the interaction. And our interaction partners can pick up on that. Even if they're not consciously aware of it, it may still impact their behavior. And so think about as I form a belief or an expectation about someone, and I go into an interaction with them. If I think, oh, this person, Joe, is untrustworthy and dishonest, and I enter an interaction with Joe and I display these kind of subtle nonverbal indications of this belief and my intention. So I lean away, I repeatedly break eye contact or refuse to make eye contact, I fidget. Joe may pick up on this and may impact his social performance. He's likely to make more speech errors. He may mimic my fidgeting. He may lean away and break eye contact with me. And odds are, right, I'm going to be much more sensitive to his social performance than my own, right? He's the one that I'm focused on. He's the one that I'm looking at. And so I walk away from this interaction thinking, man, Joe is really fidgeting, right? He just couldn't keep still. And you know what they say about liars, right? I knew that he was untrustworthy, when in reality, he was just picking up on my subtle nonverbal cues and mimicking my nonverbal behavior. And so here's where we can see self-fulfilling prophecy. One of the big reasons that relying on personal experience is problematic, because once we form a belief about another individual or about people in general or social situations, these beliefs and expectations can guide our behavior in such a way that we unconsciously or subconsciously bring about the very thing that we were expecting. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about self-fulfilling prophecy in the next few chapters. But as a hypothetical scenario, imagine that you have a coworker that is kind of a homebody and has this belief that parties are not fun. Right? They don't like social get-togethers. They avoid them at all costs. So let's say Bob, right, your coworker says, I do not like parties. But you go to Bob and you tell him, hey, I have a dinner party this weekend. I really want you to come with me. Would you please just do me a favor as my friend, as my coworker? I don't want to go alone, right? And I promise you, you'll enjoy this. Right? These are great people. They are really friendly and warm. They are interesting. This is going to be different than the parties that you're used to. I promise you'll have a great time. I always do. Right? So Bob reluctantly agrees to attend this dinner party with you. But as you're driving to the dinner party, he says, you know, I'm doing this for you, but I know I am not going to enjoy myself. I'm not going to have a good time. You guys get to the dinner party, and Bob sits over in the corner, right, with his arms crossed and a frown on his face. He doesn't introduce himself to anybody. He has kind of a negative facial expression. He doesn't try to jump in on any conversations. And so as a result, people kind of walk past him. Right? They say, well, who is this jerk over here in the corner that isn't talking to anyone? And then you guys leave the dinner party at the end of the night and you're driving home and you're telling Bob, oh, wasn't that a great evening? Oh, did you meet this person or that person? And there's so many great conversations. And Bob says, what are you talking about? I didn't meet anyone interesting. I had a terrible time, right? That was the worst night. I told you I don't like parties. I told you I wouldn't have a good time. Right? But in reality, Bob had a terrible time based on the self-fulfilling prophecy. Right? He expected to have a bad evening. He acted in such a way that he brought about the very thing that he was expecting. Right? So once formed, these beliefs and expectations regarding social situations and human nature in general can be very resistant to change. So for instance, we have the confirmation bias. People tend to be more receptive to information that is consistent with their pre-existing beliefs. They pay more attention to that information. People may actively seek out confirming evidence. It's why you see a bias in viewership for news media outlets. Right? If you are conservative, you're likely tuning in to Fox News. If you're a liberal, you're probably watching CNN or MSNBC. Right? You're actively seeking out ideas and information that reinforces your pre-existing beliefs. Right? So we have a bias and exposure and attention. And so all of this can lead to belief perseverance. So when people say, well, I have a lifetime of information and knowledge about human nature based on personal experience, those personal experiences may be limited, subjective, and potentially biased. And yet people tend to persevere in these beliefs. These ideas can be incredibly resistant to change.